Joining me now is Moritz Pot, founder and CEO of Tema ETFs. Moritz, thanks for joining.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for having us on the show today.
All right, so fractional losses across the board today. The debt ceiling still hanging in the backdrop. What do investors need to know?
I mean, there's a lot of growing concerns around the U.S. slowdown, but look at the comments coming out of Asia. Capri Holdings today reported weakening U.S. but strengthening Asian earnings. In China right now is interesting. JP Morin doing their first investor conference in the country in the last 3 or 4 years. Jamie Dimon commenting about how the world order has been upended by what's happened over the last 2-3 years. That's driving a number of structural changes. While U.S. growth slows, China's growth is coming back. The question is, how resilient is it? How long will it last? And will it also translate into broader growth across the overall economy? So overall, I think it's a situation where U.S. job numbers today were pretty good, which would potentially lead to another hike rate. But at the same time, you also see corporate earnings struggling, and that's reflected in share prices today.
Yeah, that was interesting. Just even advanced auto parts, right, which I highlighted there, that is kind of a head scratcher. But earnings do technically, in a regular market, drive the stock market, right? Obviously, rates now very much in focus, and the Fed's path forward impacting that as well. When it comes to inflation, what signs are you seeing as to where inflation is headed from here, and thus what it means for rates?
Yeah, so inflation in the U.S. still seems like we're starting to get into disinflation. It seems like there's increasing pressures on commodities. You see that in raw material commodity prices. Look at what's happened to oil in the last 2 weeks, what's happened to some of the other commodities. Overall, I think the downward pressure on inflation will delay a rate hike. At the same time, the strength in the job markets could extend the rate hike cycle we've seen. I think in general, you're starting to see signs of a U.S. slowdown. The big question is that a recession or is that just a slowdown? And hopefully for companies operating globally, some of which we covered just now, the return of Asia will offset any kind of slowdown in the U.S. short term. So overall, I think the market's still skeptical about do we see a rate hike, do we see a recession, and how does that then translate into the outlook for Q3?
Yeah. It is interesting because I know you follow the luxury market quite closely here. What sort of signs is that sending?
So the luxury market is interesting. As the U.S. slows down, Asia comes back very fast. You saw Chanel last week commenting on that they see their China business growing double digits this year. Overall, the balance of power in luxury is shifting more to the Asian markets. There was a Bloomberg report last week that suggests that over 50% of the global luxury market will be driven by Asia in the next 3-4 years. So overall, I think while growth in the U.S. has been very strong, it's clearly slowing. But at the same time, the return and reopening of Asia is encouraging. And especially within luxury, you can't underestimate that the second half of last year, a lot of the Asian economies are still relatively closed. The reopening happened late, so the comps last year are pretty low, which should factor in the second half of this year.
But I do want to point out that even though, I mean, here in America, right, this is now obviously a post-COVID era, as we saw the emergency do away in May, this month, in fact, by the White House. But I see here just a few days ago a new wave of COVID spreading in China.
Right.
And of course, their approach to COVID is much different than that of the U.S. How does that factor into this?
So far, we haven't seen mass lockdowns, and the concern is obviously that this delays some of the latent luxury spend that wasn't realized in the last 18-24 months. I would say though that the growth cycle in Asia is not just focused on China. If you look at the news coming out of what's happening in Southeast Asia, even in India, Louis Vuitton held his first show in India this year, the Dior show last month in Mumbai. So I think what it shows is that growth across Asia in the luxury sector is spreading beyond what was just assumed to be a China-driven market. And while there will be short-term disruption from COVID reopening and closing in China, the generally we see that the incremental consumer in luxury is coming from the East. And that includes younger consumers, Gen Z consumers. So I think we're pretty constructive on the outlook for luxury. Short term, there could be some headwinds in the US.
Yes.
I think where you see more headwinds is on the lower end side. So that's why Capri Holdings, Michael Kors Holdings have been hurt.
Right.
But on high-end luxury, frankly, there's so far demand's been pretty resilient.
I want to ask you one quick question. I hope we have time here, which is, I had a guest join me last week who said he thinks that in this economy that we'll see recession after recession after recession. It'll just basically be rolling recessions, right? Every time we kind of get ahead, then we'll fall down again. And obviously the consensus on Wall Street is that growth will be slowing for years to come. Yeah. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, so I think we will see a slowdown in the coming year, and I think the reality that's already reflected in corporate earnings and also reflected in forward-looking manufacturing cycles. But do I think this will be like a decade-long slowdown in economic activity? No.
Right.
Will markets be choppier and more difficult? For sure. And I think that's also why being more careful and being more selective where you position yourself in markets is becoming more important, more evident.
Yeah.
No, so I think it's inevitable there's a slowdown in growth. Whether that leads to recession is yet to be seen. I don't think we're right now we're in a cycle of prolonged recessions.
Okay. Well, hopefully that's the case for people's 401ks. I think that's what they would be hoping for sure. Moritz Pot, founder and CEO of Tema ETFs. Moritz, thank you.
Thank you.